Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. G'day and welcome back, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, Head Honcho Executive Director of the John Curtin Research Centre. Unfortunately, Kung Fu Cos Samaras is away today, but we've got a wonderful guest joining us in the studio, one of Australia's finest historians and storytellers, Ross McMullin, whose Light on the Hill has shaped how generations of Labor people understood their own history. Originally published 35 years ago, The Light on the Hill has now been completely revised and updated to cover the dramatic period between 1991 and 2025, from Keating and Howard through Rudd, Gillard and the leadership wars, and now the Albanese era, culminating in Labor's remarkable 2025 election victory. For me personally, this is one of the books that made me fall in love with Labor history. I suspect I was one of the few first-year undergraduate students to actually read the entire magnum opus. It wasn't simply the scholarship, although it's immense, but Ross's extraordinary narrative command, the pen portraits, the unforgettable anecdotes, the extraordinary detail, and above all, the fact that it is never a hagiography. It celebrates Labor's achievements without overlooking its failures. 35 years on, I still think it's the finest single-volume history of the Australian Labor Party ever written. And Ross has published other works on the Labor Party, including So Monstrous a Travesty, which is a work on the first national Labor government anywhere in the world, led by Chris Watson, Pompey Elliott, At War, Farewell Dear People, Biographies of Australia's Lost Generation. Another favourite of mine, Will Dyson, Australia's radical genius, a fascinating cartoonist. But Ross McMullin, welcome to Curtin's Cast.
Thank you, Nick.
It's terrific to have you here. 35 years is a long time.
It is.
We're both great. We're both a bit older. I was a young teenager back then. What persuaded you that this simply couldn't be another chapter tacked on to the end? And really, I guess, how much did it become a complete reconsideration of the book?
Nick, disappointing circumstances made a complete reconsideration unavoidable. You might find this hard to believe, but the publisher of the 1991 book, Oxford Uni Press, retained literally no record whatsoever of the 1991 book. Absolutely nothing. Yeah. So this meant that once I went down the path of wanting to update it, I had to get one of my own copies of the book scanned and destroyed in the process, and get the scan onto my computer as a first step. And the scanning process is inevitably prone to minor errors. So the upshot was that I had to proofread the scan of this big book, line by line, all the way through, which took months before I could even start thinking properly about how much I should adjust the text. So I wasn't impressed by that sequence of events, but proceeded nonetheless.
That must have thrown out the footnote, footnote process there in that long, convoluted, and messy process. Yeah. Did you rethink Labor's history and its early history, or I guess more importantly, its modern history when you actually got to sit down with the task of updating the history?
Yeah, I don't think it changed all that much, what I'd written already. The content didn't change a lot, but what did change a lot was the writing style. I got rid of a lot of the long paragraphs. There's literally hundreds more paragraphs in the new book, of the pre-1991 coverage, and I'm certain it reads better as a result. You know, I was a relatively inexperienced writer in the 1980s, and only done the one book before that, and quite a few more since. So I'd like to think that the writing's better in the new book than the 1991 version. Yeah.
Yes. No, I'm often horrified when I go back and read my first book, my revised PhD thesis on the early Labor Party. I wish I could burn them all, but no, I'm only joking. Going back through the lineage of the great Labor prime ministers, has your thinking changed about the pecking order? Obviously, I head up the Curtin Research Centre, and it seems to me that the aura of Curtin grows year by year, and I think we've played a little part in that. And I think Chifley too. Mm-hmm. I think Chifley and the the late Stuart McIntyre wrote on the genius of the post-war reconstruction. Has your sense of the pecking order of Labor prime ministers changed since you published the first edition all the way back in 1991, or?
I don't think so, really. I'm with you. I've got Curtin and Chifley right up there. I think the problem with, Chifley was admirable in so many ways, and he, provides the logical title for a book, doesn't he? Light on the Hill. But it's a shame that he wasn't as good a campaigner as you'd like to think he could have been. And my view, which is not, I don't think, widely held, is that Labor should never have lost in 1949. And Menzies came in and stayed there for 23 years. But if Chiff had campaigned better or thought more about the electoral impact of things that were happening, then Labor deserved very much to win again in 1949, in my view.
Yes. One of my favourites is Andy Fisher.
Absolutely.
Who went into the coal mines as a 10-year-old and was described by the Governor-General as it was 1 in a million that he would become Prime Minister, but that he did in 1908 and again in 1910 and 1914. The other figure
he's a big favourite of mine too. Big favourite. Yeah,
another favourite of mine is Bob Hawke. Now, when you first wrote this in 1991,
he launched it.
Yep. Now, again, I think similar to Curtin, and it's worth pointing out to listeners that Curtin was Hawke's favourite. That was Hawke's personal hero, and he took particular umbrage at Paul Keating's famous or infamous Placido Domingo speech, which
he did, didn't he? Yeah.
Took an implicit shot at
explicit.
Yeah. Hawke was furious about that. But it's now we are now 35 years on from the end of Bob Hawke's prime ministership. He has, of course, passed away. The aura of his prime ministership has grown too. Where does Hawke sit in the pantheon?
Yeah, he's right up there. I mean, I
clearly Labor's most electorally successful prime minister, and a big reformer too.
Yes, I agree with all of that. Another favourite of mine is Chris Watson. As you know, I've written a book about his government, and he was highly capable, under-recognised by posterity, little known these days, and his attributes particularly suited Labor during the first phase of federal parliament, I reckon.
Indeed. Now, the profession of history, we've aged, Ross, since you wrote the first edition, but the discipline of and you claim your writing style has improved. I thought it was fine. The prose was fine back then, but the discipline has changed an enormous amount. There is now more emphasis on Indigenous history, on gender, on the history of sexuality. Did that lead you to rethink parts of the narrative? And I don't think I don't think you did impose your values on any of the historical figures in the book, but I think it's worth thinking about and explaining to listeners the importance of not imposing modern or postmodern values as they might be on historical figures.
Yeah, well, I was very keen to be an independent analyst and storyteller about the history, and not there's no way did I want to be seen as some sort of factional operator, factional warrior, and so where there were big internal stoushes, ruptures inside the Labor Party, I was very keen to be seen to be scrupulously neutral. And as for changes in the way history's done, I don't think I've changed much as a historian myself, apart from hopefully becoming a bit of a better writer. But the new specialties that you highlighted, Nick, yes, I inserted more about women into the pre-1991 content, and ALP women feature strongly in the post-1991 content, and similar with Indigenous history to a lesser extent. Yeah.
Yes, well, we now have women were sparse in caucus and cabinet, and we now have a caucus which is made up of more than half women, and a cabinet which is split on gender lines.
I think it's correct to say that there are more women who are Labor women in federal parliament than there are MPs of either gender in the coalition. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. It's not that long ago that the fact that no Labor woman at all had been in federal caucus except Dorothy Tangney until 1974, that prompted this very serious book about analysing the federal ALP, textbook, sort of very no frills, just straight, had a chapter in it, Women in the Federal Labor Party, consisting of two blank pages, which I thought was a very nice way to do it, to make the point. But, yeah, things have changed now, haven't they?
They have. Well, and dramatically, we've had a female Labor Prime Minister and Australia's only female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard,
Yes.
who's also very well known for her misogyny speech. Now, again, with the extra 35 years, just a quick aside, what do you regard as the greatest speech in Labor Party history?
Oh, yes. Now,
it's a big question.
You could make a case for Goss, Kerr's Kerr on straight after being dismissed. That was pretty capable, and all of Chifley's speeches referring to the light on the hill, you could make a case for them. But as a Curtin fan, you'll like the fact that I've
your audience.
I've landed on him. I think particularly given that he had grave misgivings himself about how he'd measure up as a war leader, the fact that he did it so capably was outstanding. And some of his national speeches after the Japanese attacked, very soon after he became PM, were excellent. And there's one in particular. So May 1942. So the Japanese, Pearl Harbor has happened and been demolished, and there's this critical battle going on in the Coral Sea, and Parliament's sitting, and news came through at the time that a significant battle was underway there. And as I say in the book, his promptu remarks electrified the representatives, House of Reps. The events that are taking place today are of crucial importance. As I speak, those who are participating in the engagement are conforming to the sternest discipline and are subjecting themselves with all that they have. It may be for many of them the last full measure of their devotion. to accomplish the increased safety and security of this territory. I put it to any man whom my words may reach that he owes it to those men and to the future of the country not to be stinting in what he will do now for Australia. Men are fighting for Australia today. Those who are not fighting have no excuse for not working.
It's a ripping extract of that speech. It's Churchillian without the pomposity.
Yes, and spur of the moment.
Yes,
it's totally impromptu. And Rogers, his key advisor, who saw hard-bitten journalists moved by it, felt that the speech was Curtin's finest ever.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean the thing about this pantheon of Labor leaders and prime ministers from Watson to Fisher and Curtin is they didn't have armies of advisors and speechwriters.
Exactly.
They had people like Don Rogers, but it's a remarkable lineage. But it does beg the question: is the Labor Party the same, recognisably the same party of 1891, or the formative period in Australian politics leading up to World War One, the party of the Great Depression, the party of Curtin and Chifley, the party of Whitlam, and even Hawke and Keating? Is it fundamentally the same party? There's obvious ways in which it's changed, and I'll leave that to you to explain.
No, I agree with you. It's a sort of a bit of a yes and no situation, won't I? I think yes, in that, as you've said, there's a discernible connection between Labor today and Labor long ago. But perhaps the answer could be equally no, in that the party's support base used to be overwhelmingly working class, and now it's much more divergent. So, bit of yes and no to that question.
Another quick-fire question: looking across 135 years of history, again, it's extraordinary. One of the reasons I love the book. I fell in love with the party very much because of Keating. I was a very unusual pre-teenager and young teenager, and he captured my imagination. But reading books like this gave me a sense of, Keating was part of a bigger story and a lineage. You mentioned one particular misstep, 1949, and I think the attempt to nationalise the banks arguably crippled Chifley's prime ministership and ended an 8-year-old Labor government and ushered in 23 years of Menzies rule, which wasn't helped by Labor splitting. The split, the attempt to nationalise the banks, if you could identify the single biggest mistake that the Labor Party has made, would it be 1949 and the attempt to nationalise the banks, or is there another obvious howler?
Well, the one that jumps out at me even more is making Billy Hughes leader in 1915. I mean, it was an understandable decision at the time, but it led directly to what I regard as Labor's worst and most damaging split ever, just a year later.
What was the alternative, though? I mean, this is a period that I love. It was hard to see the alternative. He was such a big personality. He was the driving. Fisher was exhausted. He was exhausted by the war effort. There was growing internal division in the Labor movement more broadly. Was there another option?
I'm not sure. Well, certainly, as I agree with you that one doesn't jump out at you, and as I said, when I explained why I regard that as significant, it was an understandable decision at the time, I said, and partly because of what you just said, Nick, that there was no conspicuous standout alternative. Yeah, but if they had their time over again, I'm sure Caucus would not have opted to choose Billy Hughes. They'd have found someone else.
You don't get to have your time over.
No, you don't.
That's the point.
Yeah, you don't.
That's the point. But we're on to the big personalities of Labor history. One of them I just mentioned, the man who got me to who made me fall in love with the Labor Party, and we've had The first guest that we had on this podcast, Jim Chalmers, likewise, Jim's a week older than me, and Jim also fell in love with the Labor Party because of Keating, and said, he looked at Keating and he said, whatever business that gentleman is in, I want to be in the same business.
He did a PhD on him.
He did do a PhD on him.
Yeah.
30 years on, where does Keating sit historically? You were writing very much. You put out you did actually put out in 1992 a briefly updated edition. Right. I remember the cover. That's actually the edition I had. That's the edition I had, updated with Prime Minister Paul Keating. So where does Keating sit in the pantheon?
Well, I'll definitely.
I think he would regard himself as at the top.
Well, I'm not firmly disagreeing. I think he's among Labor, obviously among Labor's more admirable leaders. Activist reformer, and in terms of whether history appreciates him now more than the contemporaries did back then, probably yes, to some extent. I mean, given that there's this degree now of present-day sentiment wishing that PMs could be more activist than they seem to be able to be. And Keating was certainly an activist.
Several decades on from the end of the Keating, 13 and a half years after the end of the Keating era, Labor was racked by internal divisions between Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. It's one of it generated enormous division. Be interesting to take your view. It's interesting that you nominated Billy Hughes as a big mistake of the Labor caucus. I wonder whether the Labor caucus of 2006, if they got their opportunity back, would have stuck with Kim Beazley or made the switch to Kevin Rudd. I'll be interested in your views on that. With a little bit of historical distance, what's your take on what happened? It didn't seem to be a big debate about policy or ideology.
No.
But no. Temperament and individual and ambition and individual personalities.
Aspiration.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. But not so much the former and very much the latter, and what you were just saying. And what happened on that startling day blighted Labor federally for a decade. I concluded in researching the new book and then in writing it that the claim by Gillard and the prime movers in her leadership challenge that it was all spontaneous isn't really accurate.
I'm inclined to agree with you, but then again, had Kevin Rudd picked up a history book such as Your Fine Light on the Hill, perhaps he wouldn't have made some of the decisions in his early leadership, such as sidelining caucus, removing the power of caucus to choose the ministry. I mean, that went against a century of a Labor history which had worked, and Labor tradition which had worked generally well.
Yes, it had, I think, in the broad, but I don't think that was crucial in the leadership disturbance that eventuated. It seemed to be more about perceptions of Rudd being just buggered and snookered by what happened at Copenhagen with about climate change and that and Gillard's retrospectively has claimed that and I think she validly did at the time, that that Rudd had lost his way a bit, and he wasn't the leader he had been, and that was it was hard to be working close with him in the state that he was then in, and that in the end influenced her to do something about it, which a lot of colleagues felt that was a very ordinary decision.
Yes, it's not the first Labor government to be consumed by drama and crisis. I think I wrote in my book Heroes and Villains that you get a sense that God votes Tory, because every time Labor came to power, it seemed to be consumed by a global crisis. So
yes. Yeah,
you
they
have-
did
you
again
have-
and again.
you have
Scullin.
World War One. World War One breaks out during the 1914 election campaign.
Yes.
Literally days after, within the week of Jim Scullin winning the 1929 election, the New York stock market crashes and ushering in the Great Depression. Curtin governs during Second World War and against the grain of Labor history succeeds. Whitlam too. We haven't mentioned Gough, the towering presence, reforming presence of the party, comes to power at the end of the long Keynesian social democratic consensus and has to deal with an Australian economy which is becoming sclerotic. And
there's
the oil shock, the OPEC oil shock.
That's right. Overseas economic development again, disruptive and
And Rudd, of course, has to. Rudd and Treasurer Wayne Swan have to deal with the fallout from the GFC.
Yeah. And in fact, as I write in the new book, The Light on the Hill, they were Rudd, Swan, and all of them were incredibly aware of the Scullin precedent, and Rudd openly said, we're a big chance to be Scullin government disaster volume 2, and but to their credit, they weren't. But in terms of credit, unfortunately, they arguably didn't get the credit they might have got for it, because as so often happens in these things, if you avoid bad consequences, the electorate hasn't a clue that what's been avoided could have been very significant, and that those who did the avoiding deserve credit for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Someone who didn't avoid Labor's problems and its structural problems was Gough. I just mentioned him before. There's this argument that Gough led the party for a very long time, a decade. We often think about his prime ministership as that short 3-year kind of interregnum, but he led the party from 1967 to 1977. So he in fact led the party for, I think Curtin died in office. He led the party slightly longer than Curtin. So Curtin had been the longest serving federal leader, and then Gough took that mantle, and then Gough did more than I think any other single figure in Labor Party history to change the actual face of the party. Now I have my reservations about how far that change went, and you sort of hinted at the middle classing of the ALP, and it's not the same distinctively working class party. Some of those forces driving that change are out of the party's control. And we're seeing that across the Anglosphere, the Western world.
Yep.
But I wonder if you could give people a sense of just how epic the Whitlamite revolution was, and the fact that he came close to losing his job and not becoming Prime Minister because of his determination to reform the party. And he had that mantra, party, policy, people, the 3 Ps.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, it was. He wasn't shy of generating upheaval, in whatever he did, and particularly in reforming the Labor Party. And he when he came up, one example springs to mind when he did that fiery speech to the Victorian ALP.
Yes.
Yeah. And what was the words he used?
He said that only the impotent are pure.
Absolutely. That's it. And
that was to a bunch of rabid left-wingers who controlled the Victorian ALP at that point.
Yes.
They were not particularly impressed.
They were not. So this is how the Victorian ALP ended up after the 50 split, really. Gough was, had no fears about taking them on, and also changing the whole policy structure and reforming all that. I mean, he was uninhibited and unafraid in how he tackled internal party reforms.
Indeed, not short of an ego. Now, one of the great pleasures of the Light on the Hill is it isn't just filled with these big figures of the ALP. It's filled with extraordinary personalities, of course, famous, forgotten, everything between. Which forgotten Labor figure fascinates you the most, or which lost talent do you think deserves more than history gave them? There are just so many. There's a roll call of fascinating figures, particularly the early party. I love the fact that Labor's leader in the Senate, its deputy leader Gregor McGregor, was a half-blind ex wrestler who worked as a sort of a farmer and a labourer.
Yeah. I mean, he was extraordinary. I mean, and so the Watson government, when they're sworn in, he positioned himself last, as I think the only senator in the government from memory, in the ministry, and the others had read this document as part of the swearing in, and McGregor stunned everybody by having heard it, 5 or 6 times when the others did it. He did it from memory because he couldn't read it.
Yes,
it's
amazing.
Amazing, and he's a minister, But in terms of which forgotten Labor figure fascinates me most, it'd have to be Frank Anstey. I'm a big fan of it, and given that you've written a lot about the party in his time, I mean, you'll have a good sense of.
You might want to tell listeners about Frank Anstey because they probably know nothing about him. He was a complex character.
Yes,
very complex character, but he was John Curtin's mentor.
John Curtin's mentor, yep.
In fact, I wrote about Frank. I mentioned Frank Anstey in the Australian. That not often that Frank Anstey makes the pages of the Australian, but he made the pages of the Australian the other weekend when I did mention.
Is that right? Good on you.
I mentioned him and the influence of the Victorian Socialist Party, which you also, I know you write about. That's where I first learned about the influence of the Marxist Victorian Socialist Party on the Labor Party. This was Tom Mann's, very much Tom Mann's creation.
Yes.
It produced Anstey. I pointed this out in the Australian that might have shocked readers, and along with the appearance of the word Marxism, it produced Anstey, John Curtin, John Kane Senior, and so many others.
And the one I really think's a standout, Frank Hyatt.
Yes.
Yeah. So Curtin and Hyatt were best mates, and I tend to feel, as I wrote, that Hyatt was more equipped to become PM than Curtin ever was, and he would have been a good one. But Hyatt, and they were both mentored by Frank Anstey, but Hyatt died prematurely of Spanish flu when he was in Sydney as the wicketkeeper of the Victorian cricket team at the time, and the stateside, and Curtin was devastated, and it was a big loss for the Labor movement generally, because Frank Hyatt was equipped to be, someone we could have been talking about easily in an interview like this, someone very special.
Yeah. Coming back to Anstey though,
Anstey.
Yeah, he's fascinating. I mean, I was going to ask you before about, the historical profession has changed in many ways, that people can now jump onto Trove and read digitised copies of the old Labor movement newspapers. And I'd encourage people, have a look at Frank Anstey's writings for Toxin and for Labor Call, for, fire-breathing editorials and opinion pieces. And he wrote numerous pamphlets and books. One particular controversially titled The Kingdom of Shylock, but a complex character.
Complex in that he was also linked to John Wren.
Yes.
Very conspicuously and dubiously.
John Wren, kind of a Mick Gatto, an Irish Catholic Mick Gatto.
Yeah. And he delivered these fervent speeches in Parliament and elsewhere, not just Parliament. And he combined idealism, fervour, leadership in the mentor role, and very influential. And I think he had a big impact. When people turned up those days to public events and in ways that we wouldn't believe was routine these days, but it was then. And thousands and thousands of people turn up to Frank Anstey speaking. Oh, we'll rock up there, and be moved, be stirred, because he was extraordinary. And we talked about Scullin. Anstey had become by then, a senior minister in cabinet, and when after they'd been in, as we discussed, for 5 minutes, and the Great Depression hits, and oh hell, we're buggered, sort of thing. Anstey said, "Have a double dissolution." Yeah, that's the way. That's the way to avoid this. And he made all these public statements about that, and he's very fervent. And when his colleagues didn't agree with him, and they ended up blighted by it all, the government.
He withdrew the members' bar with Curtin.
He did, but he not all the time. He delivered fervent speeches in Parliament about it.
He certainly did. Yeah. He delivered some fervent speeches during World War One. I know you've pinged Billy Hughes for the split, but Anstey too was raging away and was the first really to break. And he denounced when you think about it's extraordinary in the House of Representatives.
Yes, so this
is sort of early,
very well before conscription was an issue.
No, this is middle of 2015. He effectively said
1915.
Yeah, 1915. He said this is not a Labor government.
Yes,
this is not a Labor government.
Yeah.
Now, let's fast forward a century. It's difficult to write. I know it was probably a challenge writing about Paul Keating because he'd just become Prime Minister all the way back with the first edition. We've now had 4 years of a Labor government, a majority Labor government led by Anthony Albanese. History is difficult to write, and it's something I've experienced and writing with comrade Frank Bongiorno. History is difficult to write while people remain in office. Now I'm encountering a problem that I often know state leaders and prominent federal leaders I know on a personal basis, and it can be difficult to write about these people. But I wanted to ask you, after the Albanese government's whopping re-election, it's a whopping re-election in the sense that it won 94 lower house seats, but it's what we call so it's a broad but a shallow victory. It's a shallow victory. Where does Albo currently sit in the Labor tradition, and what do you think will ultimately determine his historical reputation if you go back and maybe rewrite another edition in a decade?
Well, he's clearly among Labor's more notable leaders. That was an extraordinary triumph, the last election, not only in terms of the ultimate result on election night, but in the broader context that not long before, Labor was said to be in big trouble and was tipped that they'd lose. So the idea that they would then have this landslide win that's arguably the second biggest election triumph in the Federal Party's history was a remarkable turnaround. So, yeah, Albo campaigned well. Paul Ericsson's clearly, the campaign director, clearly highly capable.
Oh, yes. He's right up there with the likes of Mick Young and others.
Yes.
The pantheon of Labor campaigners.
I think how Albo ends up being regarded, I mean, this is not a profound statement, but it will end up being influenced by how long he remains leader, and also how effective, influential and reformist his government ends up being. So Hawke was leader for about 8 or 9 years, I think, yeah. And I read somewhere the other day that if Albo remains leader, so where are we?
He's just about to overtake Keating.
Yes, and he's not far from, if he, as he surely will, remain leader till the next election. So is that 9 years then?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's longer than Hawke, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It's stacking up.
It's stacking up. Yes.
So certainly in longevity.
Yeah, it is. So let's barrack for some significant reforms that put him up in that category too.
And they are moving into that space
Yes.
with capital gains and negative gearing and
Yes.
moving on housing. Now, you were meant to spend an evening with Anthony Albanese,
Yes.
who actually launched your Light on the Hill revised edition
Yes.
in Adelaide National Conference, but you were sick.
Yes.
and
Couldn't go.
I'm glad you've recovered, Ross.
Couldn't go to Adelaide.
So the final question, if you could spend an evening with a single Labor figure, and I'm going to hold you to one figure from 135 years of party history, who would it be?
Okay, so from 135 years, that means I can have someone who doesn't have to be still alive?
Correct.
Frank
I think
Anstey.
that's the point. It's
Frank
Anstey.
Anstey, yes.
There you go.
Yeah, if it was someone who has to be alive, it'd be a toss-up between Jim Chalmers and Tanya Plibersek. And in this context, as it happens, an oral history interviewer for the Parliamentary Library decades ago. And I did enjoy many yarns, not just one night, one evening, many yarns in long interviews with people like Susan Ryan, Frank Crean and Jean Meltzer, which were terrific. All three were terrific.
Well, I think we've worked out your next book project. That's writing a biography of Frank Anstey.
Yes.
Because one of my great mates, the late
Peter Love.
Peter Love threatened to turn his PhD into a fully fledged book, but tragically never got around to that.
It never happened, and it's a big shame that it hasn't been published, isn't it?
Oh, that's your challenge. That could be your challenge.
Yeah.
That could be your challenge.
Happy to take it on.
Ross, congratulations. Updating a landmark work after 35 years is an extraordinary achievement. The result isn't simply a new edition. It's a fresh history of Labor's journey, covering all those spectacular triumphs and tragedies, the legendary personalities, ideological battles, and, as we've just discussed, the triumphant return to majority government and dominance under Anthony Albanese. For anyone interested in Australian politics, whether you're a Labor supporter or otherwise, Ross, we do have a loyal contingent of Tories who listen into the pod. The Light on the Hill is essential reading. It's up. The updated history is out now through Scribe, published by the extraordinary Henry Rosenblum, who's published my work as well. You can buy it everywhere, online, in quality bookstores. Ross McMullin, thank you very much for joining us on Curtin's Cast.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thanks very much.
And Curtinistas for now, that's it. We'll catch up with Kung Fu Kos Samaras, if I can track him down through Melbourne's northwestern suburbs. But for now, it's ciao and arrivederci.